Hey everyone, it's DinaKalmeta here, and for today's news, we have a few different topics I wanted to go over, but I first want to give a shout out to all of those who participated in our little poll the other day. We were discussing whether or not 3i Atlas is a comet, a spaceship, or something entirely different, and I loved to see your answers. And all of them, all real possibilities. So we'll wait to see what happens, but I just want to give you guys a shout out for participating. But with that said, let's talk about what has been going on in the news. And let's start with Russia. Russia is training assault units on horseback to counter Ukraine's drones and landmines. Prophecy watchers couldn't help but pause. Horses galloping across battlefields of Eastern Europe in the 21st century? It sounds more like a scene from the book of Ezekiel than a modern war report. And yet, here we are. According to Russian military sources and footage verified by multiple outlets, commanders in Donetsk region are forming horse-mounted assault teams. 2 soldiers per horse practicing under drone cover, training animals to stay calm amid the chaos. A Kremlin-linked blogger described them as modern horde, noting that horses see well at night and can instinctively avoid mines. So it's not a return to romantic cavalry charges, it's desperation. A low-tech answer to a high-tech nightmare. Drones hover overhead, minefields choke the ground, and mechanized units are easy prey. So Russia, the world's most sanctioned state, is resorting to tactics older than the tank. But for students of Bible prophecy, one question rises like thunder. Could this be a glimpse, perhaps, just a shadow, or what the prophet Ezekiel foresaw nearly 2,600 years ago? Ezekiel 38 paints a startling picture. A coalition led by Gog of the land of Magog comes from the uttermost parts of the north against the Holy Land. The invaders are described as all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. For centuries, interpreters puzzled over those horses. Why would a modern invasion, one involving a superpower like Russia, use horsemen? Skeptics dismissed it as ancient imagery. Others said that Ezekiel was using symbols, describing tanks, trunks, or aircraft in language his audience could understand. Yet others argued the text should be taken literally, that in some future scenario, the armies of the North might indeed revert to horses, whether by necessity or by the collapse of technology. And now, curiously, Russia is reviving horse-mounted forces, not in symbolic prophecy, but in the mud and mines. Putin said on Sunday that Russia has successfully tested its unstoppable nuclear-powered cruise missile with a 8,700-mile test flight. Moscow says the weapon can pierce any defense shield and has limited range. Asked on Air Force One about the test of the missile, dubbed the SSC X-9 Skyfall by NATO, Trump said that the United States did not need its nukes to fly so far as it had nuclear submarines off the coast of Russia. President's words were, "They know we have a nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shores. So I mean, our missile doesn't have to go 8,000 miles. I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying either. By the way, you ought to get the war ended. The war that should have taken 1 week is now in its 4th year. That's what you ought to do instead of testing missiles." Now, in response to Trump on Monday, the Kremlin defiantly stated that despite all our openness to establishing a dialogue with the United States, Russia, first of all, and the president of Russia, is guided by our own national interests. That's how it was, that's how it is, and that's how it's going to be. Norway is warning that Putin is amassing nuclear weapons and attack submarines in the Arctic Circle, what they're calling a clear sign that Russia is gearing up for a confrontation with NATO. Norway's defense minister claimed his country had found that Russia had been increasing its military presence in the Arctic, particularly in the Kola Peninsula. The politician also said that Putin had been attempting to take over the Arctic region where its fleet is based to block shipping routes to NATO's allies if war were to break out. He said that Russia is building up the Kola Peninsula, where one of the largest arsenals of nuclear warheads in the world is located. The nuclear weapons are not only pointed towards Norway, but towards the UK and over the pole, towards Canada and the US. He went on to say that we are the eyes and ears of NATO in this area, and we see that they're testing new weapons. For example, hypersonic missiles, and they are testing nuclear-driven torpedoes and nuclear warheads. Now in Venezuela, Maduro has accused President Trump of inventing a new eternal war after the Pentagon deployed the aircraft carrier, the USS Ford, its largest warship, into the Caribbean waters. The US has already deployed 8 Navy ships to the region, as well as nuclear-powered submarines and around 6,000 sailors and Marines, according to officials. The increased American military presence in the Caribbean follows at least 10 airstrikes on vessels in the area due to Venezuela's illegal actions. Maduro said in an address on Friday that the U.S. had promised that they would never again get involved in a war, but they are getting involved in a new eternal war. And in Europe, Switzerland is pouring millions into modernizing its Cold War bunker system, while Croatia reinstates mandatory military service. 2 nations quietly preparing for instability. So let's connect some dots with what's happening in Europe. Croatia's decision to reinstate military service comes after decades of an all-volunteer force. They're not doing this because they want to. They're doing it because they're seeing the same intelligence NATO is seeing. Switzerland, famous for neutrality, is investing heavily in civil defense infrastructure. They're updating bunkers that were built during the Cold War to protect their entire population. When Switzerland starts preparing, you know that the threat is real. And it's not just them. According to multiple European defense sources, Poland has increased defense spending by 40%. Finland and Sweden fast-tracked NATO membership. Germany is rebuilding its military after decades of downsizing. And the Baltic states are conducting regular civil defense drills. Europe is preparing for something, and they're not being quiet about it either. So let's think about this for a little bit. When was the last time we saw this level of military preparation across these nations? When was the last time neutral countries started to prepare for conflict? Right before World War II. Now, I'm not saying we're there yet, but I am saying the patterns are eerily similar. From bunkers to mandatory military service to borderlines to stockpiling, nations are quietly preparing for change and instability. But God is faithful. He warned us that we would see these things before they happened so that we would know when they happened. In the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he told us that we would hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see that we are not alarmed, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. He said not to be troubled because these are the birthing pains. So we do not live in fear. The Bible tells us over 365 times not to fear, but we stay awake, vigilant, and pray for our leaders that they make the right choices. But that is where the Bible stands when we see these events, and especially what's happening with Russia and the horses. That right there is prophetic. But let's move along and talk about what is happening with our weather. Jamaica has been declared a disaster area after Hurricane Melissa wreaked havoc on the island, leaving a trail of destruction before the storm slammed into Cuba. Entire towns have been left underwater and tens of thousands of tourists remain trapped after Melissa, the most powerful storm in the Caribbean's modern history, tore into the nation. Some 15,000 Jamaicans are hunkered down in shelters. As many as 530,000 people are without power. They're calling Melissa the storm of the century. In addition, Cuba suffered significant damage after the storm made landfall on Wednesday morning as a Category 3 hurricane. Around 140,000 people are cut off by rising river levels as the storm lashes the country and heads towards the Bahamas. So certainly prayers go out to all those affected by this storm. I want to also add that when we see these types of things that happen, we're told in the book of Luke that we will see signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars with distress of nations, the sea and the waves roaring. And that is exactly what we're seeing here with this storm. So certainly signs of the times. So let's move along and talk about another hurricane that's brewing, and that is here in the United States as it relates to the government shutdown. I'd like to bring you a piece here from Michael Schneider of the Most Important News, and we're going to talk about what's going to happen on November 1st. Approximately 1 out of every 8 U.S. residents is on food stamps. So how do you think they are going to react when their EBT cards suddenly don't work anymore? The government shutdown has already been going on for 25 days, and there is no end in sight. The Democrats have absolutely no intention of giving President Trump what he wants, and President Trump has absolutely no intention of giving the Democrats what they want. We are potentially facing the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. And the first day of next month is when things are going to get very real for tens of millions of Americans. The U.S. Department of Agriculture just announced that there will be no more funding for the food stamp program starting on November 1st. This is really happening. People that have been relying on their EBT card to pay for their groceries for years will have to find some other way to feed themselves. The CEO of Hunger Free America says that we are facing the greatest hunger catastrophe in America since the Great Depression. SNAP supports working families with low-paying jobs, low-income people aged 60 years and older, and people with disabilities living on a fixed income. And you know what? He isn't exaggerating. There will be millions upon millions of people that suddenly do not have enough food to eat. And hunger tends to make people very angry. By now, you have probably seen some of the EBT meltdown compilation videos that are all over YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. Large numbers of people are threatening to get their groceries like they normally do once food stamp benefits run out. They plan to load up their carts and walk straight out the front door without paying. And if someone tries to stop them, well, they're threatening to do other things. Needless to say, it will not be a fun time to work at a grocery store. Michael goes on to report that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does have a $6 billion contingency fund, but the urgency is telling us that it will not use that fund to pay food stamp benefits next month. The reason why the USDA officials have come to the conclusion that they cannot use that fund is because they believe that federal law makes it illegal to do so. In a memo, the USDA said that the reason is simple. The contingency fund was designed to respond to unforeseen events like natural disasters, and the current shutdown doesn't qualify because it was manufactured by the Democrats. To spend the money on SNAP benefits during such an event, the USDA argues, would be illegal. And that comes from Axios. But the Democrats are arguing otherwise. They insist that it is legal to use the fund during this shutdown, and that is what they're telling people. The good news, if you want to call it that, is that some states such as Virginia will use their own funds to provide food stamp benefits next month. But most states do not have enough money to be able to do this. So this will just add to a lot of confusion. Some people will be getting their food stamp benefits and others will not. For many of those that suddenly have their benefits cut off, life will get even harder than it is now. Let's continue to hope that this crisis is resolved by Thanksgiving, because if it isn't, things are going to get really, really crazy. In the meantime, federal workers that suddenly find themselves without paychecks are lining up for assistance. NBC News is reporting that federal workers lined up around the corner outside the Capitol Area Food Bank in Southeast Washington, D.C. on Friday after missing their first full paychecks when shutdown began. The food bank, set up specifically for federal workers, provided boxed meals, household goods, and personal hygiene items to over 250 federal employees on Friday. Now, on top of everything else, if the government shutdown lasts long enough, members of the U.S. military will start missing paychecks in the middle of the month. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Sunday that service members will miss paychecks by November 15th if the government shutdown stretches on, despite the Trump administration's previous assurances that members of the military will be paid amid the funding lapse. He said, "I think we'll be able to pay them beginning in November, but by November 15th, our troops and service members who are willing to risk their lives aren't going to be able to get paid." So we still have time for the government to open before November 1st. Whether they will do it or not, that's another question. But I want to hear from you guys. How has this government shutdown affected you personally? Let me know in the comments. Maybe it hasn't affected you at all, but it is going to affect millions of people on November 1st. But those are your headlines for today. Before you leave, make sure to like this video if you enjoyed what I brought to you today. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And until next time, God bless everyone and stay safe.